All right, and we are live, and we are certainly living through a period of unprecedented change and unprecedented potential crisis, at least in recent history. And we're going to go over some signs that a crisis is potentially right around the corner. Do me a favor also, welcome to the live stream. Just give me a 1 if everything is coming in loud and clear down there in the chat. And let's get right into this because today it was announced that the U.S. will be easing sanctions on Venezuela. Now, I mean, the whole story here that this is the result of us reaching an election deal with them, I think is pretty ludicrous. I think that it doesn't take, a geopolitical analyst of much caliber to understand why these sanctions are being lifted at the moment. And thank you to everybody in the chat. So it's been announced that for the next 6 months, Venezuela will be able to produce and export oil to its chosen markets. And they did include some language with this deal, according to this story here from Reuters. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken welcomed the electoral concessions, but said Washington has given him until the end of November to begin lifting bans on opposition presidential candidates and start releasing political prisoners and other wrongfully detained Americans. And yeah, I'm sure that Maduro is going to have a real, genuine election there. I'm sure there will be a lot of integrity in that. But one thing that will happen is some extra oil will be hitting the markets, and just in time because, of course, the events playing out in the Middle East right now suggest that the price of oil may be going much, much higher in the very near future. In fact, today, look at that, back over $90 WTI crude, up 2.55%, and I think probably going much, much higher. Now, one thing that really was interesting about this move was the action that we saw at the same time in the 10-year yield. So the 10-year yield selling off today. We're almost at 5% here in the 10-year Treasury note, and yet we saw commodities, crude oil, the precious metals, which we'll take a look at here in just a moment, rising despite the fact that the debt market was selling off and yields were on the move up. And now you can see where we're at here, 4.988%, just shy of 5. And if we go above about 5.2, that will mean that we are at the highest levels. We're exceeding the highest levels from 2007. And to get a higher rate, you would need to go back to 2002 or 2001. Constitutional Stacker, I will email you on Monday. We might not be able to do it on Monday, but thank you, sir, for the support there in the super chat. So the rate on the 10-year moving up significantly, but we're still seeing crude oil move up. We're still seeing, let's take a look at the gold price. A pretty good day in gold here, back up to almost $2,000 here, courtesy of SD Bullion. And that's a pretty big move up at the end of the day. Silver similarly putting on a gain. So we're seeing all of the metals rise as the markets dip. Now, I mentioned this in, I think it was yesterday's live stream. Correct me if I'm wrong about that, but we were talking about how the dynamic between yields on treasuries and the precious metals would change because one thing we saw, I believe it was yesterday, the spike up in the 10-year yield and then silver sold off, almost a direct inverse correlation there. But today you can see that dynamic may be changing, and I think that will change in a very big way when investors realize that inflation is going to be moving a lot higher than it is right now. I wanted to comment on fossil fuels, petroleum products a little bit here today. So here's part of the reason why we are lifting the sanctions on Venezuela. I mean, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve is down to the lowest level since what? You got to go back to the mid-80s to find a comparable level. And then, think about this, the oil consumption in the U.S., of course, is a lot higher than it was back in the 80s. We've got a lot more people, a lot more energy use. And so in terms of, how long this will last us, this is an even smaller amount than it was back in the 80s. But yeah, this is why we are lifting the sanctions on Venezuela, and it's a sign, they might tell us that a peace deal will be reached. They may tell us that, they're going to try to avoid escalation, but you got to look at what they're doing, not at what they are saying. And the fact that they are lifting these sanctions indicates that, it has nothing to do with an election deal. Let's just put it that way. They know that there's something around the corner that's not going to be good. Yeah, hey, there's Troy P. Okay, this is one of the things I wanted to bring up here. I want to read this comment to you in the chat. Not to be a jerk, nothing. But will you stop calling them fossil fuels? It's a renewable oil day. So, okay, it's kind of an incomprehensible comment the way you wrote that, Troy. But I wanted to comment on this, just how divisive things have become. I've been talking about oil a fair amount on the channel recently in light of the events in the Middle East, and I've been getting deluged with these comments telling me to stop calling them fossil fuels. And look, I'm not a petroleum engineer, I'm not a chemical engineer, and I'm guessing that the folks who are leaving these comments probably are not either. But regardless of how you think oil is generated, if you don't know what I'm talking about here, I guess there are these theories that oil is potentially biogenic, like it's created by organisms or something at the low in the strata of the crust. Again, I'm not an expert on this by any means, but pretty sure that the consensus is that oil is created by, large mats of carbon rich material like fern forests and stuff like that being compressed over time into hydrocarbons. And, again, that I think is the mainstream consensus. I don't think that this biogenic oil thing really quite falls into the realm of like a flat earth theory, but I think it might be in the same ballpark. And again, I'm not an expert, but to those of you who are triggered by the term fossil fuels, I had no idea that this word would be so divisive. But if you want to find out how crazy and divided everybody is out there with their pet theories, just start a YouTube channel and talk about something slightly divisive or something as banal as, the term fossil fuels, and you're going to get inundated with comments about this. And I'm sorry to harp on this, but I there have been a lot of these comments telling me to stop using the term fossil fuels, and I'm not going to do that because it's a common turn of phrase. And if you're triggered by the term fossil fuels, I apologize, but pretty sure that is the mainstream consensus among, chemical engineers and folks who actually extract the stuff out of the ground. So regardless, it doesn't even matter because I'm not part of some conspiracy to promulgate, alternative theories or mainstream theories about how petroleum is created. I'm just talking about the geopolitical implications in the price. So please, again, sorry to harp on this for so long, but just chill with the fossil fuel stuff. I'm not going to stop calling it that. Anyway, let's see. Yeah, thank you. There's some reasonable people in the chat. Oh, real quick, do me a favor. Put a 1 in the chat if you are triggered by the term fossil fuels. Put a 2 if you think it's an acceptable term to use. I would really like to get a poll on the audience out there since this seems to be such a divisive issue. Next thing I wanted to look at here is the debt to the penny here. We were looking at the debt clock in the live stream we hopped on earlier, and I noticed that this number has spiked up overnight seemingly to 33.65. Someone's spamming 2. Yeah, okay. 2 seems to be the consensus, at least among this audience. So, 33.653 trillion. It looks like we are back to the spending spree, although I wanted to look at these numbers because these are the official numbers from the Treasury. It looks like it did have a big spike up on the 17th. As of yesterday, the 18th, it looked like it actually came down a little bit, but who knows how much you can even really trust these official numbers. They probably give you an approximation of the debt, although, hey, it is down to the penny. So we're going to see this number moving much, much higher, though, in the very near future for a number of reasons. One, if they do try to refill the SPR, since we might be headed to World War III, might be good to have some oil in reserve, they're going to have to spend a lot of money to do it because the price of oil is going to be going much higher. But also, the stress that high oil will be placing on the economy is going to decrease tax receipts. They're going to keep trying to increase spending to stimulate an economy which is ailing after years of misguided monetary policy. So again, all the uncertainty out there regarding the price of oil and everything, one number you can count on moving higher is this one right here. And ultimately that will have to be monetized, and that is going to be very inflationary. And one other thing I wanted to message about here. Yeah, Troy, it's okay. You were texting and driving. I know, but I'm going to keep saying fossil fuels. Anyway, I'm not picking on you, Troy. I just have been inundated with comments about this fossil fuel thing. Like, I had no idea that this was going to be so divisive. And again, that's just an indication of everybody's pet thing that is, extremely divisive right now, and how society is just being fractured. It's just a microcosm of that. This was a story we mentioned in a recent live stream regarding ammunition shortages. NATO was telling us, a top admiral at NATO in Europe there was telling us that they are running low on the ammunition in the warehouses. And I had forecast that in light of this and some other announcements we had heard regarding the Lake City ammunition plant here in the U.S., and their cancellation of all commercial sales, that we would likely begin to see ammunition shortages in the civilian market. And since I did that video, we've seen a pretty big move up in some of these ammunition prices. This site here, Ammunition Depot, I have no affiliation with them whatsoever. I'm just using them as an example, but you can see the cost per round for some of these popular ammunition varieties is moving much higher. And I think that this is just a sign of what is to come regarding inflation and shortages in general. If you thought the supply chain disruptions that we experienced a couple years ago during the health crisis, if you thought those were bad, then the shortages that are likely to result from an escalation in the Middle East and possibly an involvement of these global South BRICS nations against the U.S., even if it's just in the realm of economic warfare, if we see embargoes, if we see more sanctions, the inflation and shortages are going to be severe. And I think this is just going to be one of many. But I did want to point out that this stuff is still getting a lot more expensive. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if we see these things that are on the screen right now go to $1 a round, maybe higher in the very near future, considering the scope of the conflict which is brewing. I see some folks in the chat there saying that they're stocking up on these, and I don't give advice or financial advice or tell you how to spend your money or anything, but I think that that's probably a wise decision on their part. Yeah, someone's talking in the chat there about Biden giving his address tonight. It's going to be awfully interesting. I'll be tuned in, and who knows, maybe we'll even talk about it a little later tonight if there's anything relevant there. Because again, I got to say, I not having a huge amount of confidence instilled by the fella so far, but still, it's worth listening to what he has to say because it might give you an idea of what's in store there. I wonder if he'll talk about the Venezuela thing. It's going to be very interesting, but keep an eye on that, and everybody, and also just be aware that the price of crude oil and the price of just about everything is probably about to go a lot higher. Boone Master Sergeant, I agree. We are in war already, and I think that when you go to a future point in time and you look back on the situation that we find ourselves in, I think that it may well be the case that the event that triggers World War III may have already occurred. Because remember, when these conflicts kick off, they don't really name them right away. Sometimes it takes some time for that name or that moniker to get adopted. So we will see, folks, but it's not looking good, and I just suggest getting prepared. At least that's what I'm doing. Again, no advice, no financial advice or anything on this channel, but I do like to share with you my thoughts on things and what I'm doing, and I just hope that all of you can stay safe. Happy stacking, everybody. I'll catch you next time. Smart Silver Stacker out.